Rain hammered against the barracks windows like bullets against armor, each drop a reminder of the storm raging both outside and within Maya Chen's chest. At 23, she had already been written off by more people than she cared to count. Her drill instructor's voice still echoed in her ears from that morning. "Chen, you're about as useful as a chocolate teapot in a firefight." The other recruits had snickered, their laughter cutting deeper than any blade could have managed. Maya sat alone on her narrow bunk, her uniform still damp with sweat from the day's brutal training exercises. She had failed again. Failed the marksmanship test, failed the obstacle course, failed to meet the expectations that seemed to come so naturally to everyone else. Her hands trembled as she held the letter from her mother, the words blurring through tears she refused to let fall. In front of the others. "Maybe you should come home, sweetheart," the letter read. "There's no shame in admitting this isn't for you. Your father and I just want you to be happy." But Maya knew what happiness meant to her. It meant proving that the scrawny girl from Chinatown who spoke broken English until she was 12 could become something more than the sum of her failures. The military had been her escape route from a life that offered few alternatives. Growing up in San Francisco's cramped apartment buildings, watching her parents work 16-hour days at the restaurant just to keep food on the table, Maya had dreamed of something bigger. She had dreamed of respect, of purpose, of being someone who mattered. Instead, she found herself at the bottom of every ranking, the subject of whispered conversations about who would wash out first. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had pulled her aside after weapons training, his weathered face a mask of professional disappointment. "Look, Chen," he had said, his voice not unkind but brutally honest, "not everyone is cut out for this life. There's no dishonor in recognizing your limitations." His words were meant to be gentle, but they landed like hammer blows against her already fragile confidence. The thing was, Maya knew she wasn't naturally gifted like some of the other recruits. Take Jackson, for instance. 6 feet of pure muscle and coordination who could field strip a rifle blindfolded and hit targets that were barely visible to the naked eye. Or Williams, whose tactical mind seemed to process battlefield scenarios, like a computer running complex algorithms. They made it look effortless, while Maya struggled with even the most basic tasks. But what her instructors and fellow recruits didn't see were the hours Maya spent after lights out, practicing her movements. In the darkness, memorizing every manual until she could recite procedures in her sleep. They didn't see how she stayed behind to clean weapons that weren't hers, hoping to gain just a few more minutes of familiarity with the equipment that felt so foreign in her hands. They didn't know that she had been studying battlefield tactics since she was 16, devouring every book on military strategy she could find in the public library. Maya's fascination with military history had begun almost by accident. During her junior year of high school, she had been assigned a report on World War II and had stumbled across the story of the 432nd Regimental Combat Team, Japanese-American soldiers who fought with extraordinary courage despite facing discrimination at home. Something about their determination to prove their loyalty and worth had resonated deeply within her. She had spent countless hours researching not just their battles, but the strategies behind them, the logistics that made victory possible, the psychology of leadership under impossible conditions. Yet none of that seemed to matter when she couldn't hit a target at 200 yards or when her performance on the obstacle course was consistently the worst in her platoon. Maya had always been better with her mind than her body, but the military seemed to value only the latter. She felt like a philosopher trying to compete in a strongman competition, out of place and fundamentally mismatched to the task at hand. The other recruits had started calling her Ghost because she seemed to disappear whenever anything important was happening. The nickname stung because it contained a grain of truth. Maya did tend to fade into the background, not out of cowardice, but out of a growing certainty that she had nothing valuable to contribute. She watched from the sidelines as natural leaders emerged from their ranks, as friendships formed around shared competencies she didn't possess. Tonight, as the storm raged outside, Maya pulled out a small notebook she kept hidden beneath her mattress. In it, she had been documenting everything she observed about their training, analyzing the exercises from a strategic perspective that seemed to interest no one but herself. She had identified patterns in how their instructors designed scenarios, had begun to understand the underlying principles that governed each test and challenge. For instance, she had noticed that the obstacle courses weren't just about physical fitness. They were about problem-solving under pressure, about finding efficient paths through complex challenges. The marksmanship tests weren't just about steady hands and good eyes. They were about breath control, mental focus, and the ability to perform consistently under stress. The team exercises weren't just about following orders. They were about communication, trust, and the delicate balance between individual initiative and collective goals. Maya understood all of this intellectually, could analyze it, could even see ways to improve upon the training methods. But understanding and executing were two different things, and she seemed incapable of bridging that gap. Her mind moved like lightning while her body stumbled through molasses, creating a frustrating disconnect that left her feeling more isolated with each passing day. The worst part was the growing certainty that she was wasting everyone's time, including her own. Resources were being spent on her training that could be better allocated to recruits with actual potential. Every failure felt like theft, stealing opportunities from others who might make better use of them. The guilt was becoming as heavy as the physical exhaustion that dragged at her bones. As Maya closed her notebook and prepared for another sleepless night, she couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would bring more of the same. More failures. More disappointment, more evidence that everyone who had called her worthless might actually be right. The rain continued its relentless assault against the windows, and somewhere in that rhythmic pounding, Maya heard the sound of her own dreams slowly drowning. The emergency sirens began wailing at 0347 hours, their piercing cry cutting through the storm like a knife through silk. Maya jolted awake, muscle memory taking over as she rolled out of her bunk and began pulling on her gear with practiced efficiency. Around her, the barracks erupted into controlled chaos as 43 recruits prepared for what they assumed was another midnight drill designed to test their readiness and break their spirits. But this wasn't a drill. Maya could sense it in the way Staff Sergeant Rodriguez burst through the doors, his usually composed demeanor replaced by something she had never seen before, genuine urgency mixed with barely contained panic. His eyes swept the room with military precision, but there was something different in his gaze, something that made Maya's analytical mind immediately begin cataloging details others might miss. "Listen up, maggots," Rodriguez barked, but his voice carried a tension that spoke of real stakes rather than training exercises. "We have a situation developing 30 clicks northeast of here. Intelligence suggests a coordinated attack on the Riverside Federal Research Facility. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." The facility Rodriguez mentioned was something Maya had read about in her obsessive consumption of military intelligence reports. A classified installation that supposedly housed some of the government's most sensitive cybersecurity research. Most of the other recruits probably had no idea what it was, but Maya's habit of reading every piece of available intelligence had given her a comprehensive understanding of the region's strategic assets. As Rodriguez continued his briefing, Maya's mind began processing the information with startling clarity. The attack patterns he described, the timing coinciding with the storm, the specific target selection. None of it felt random. There was an underlying logic to it, a strategic framework that reminded her of case studies she had analyzed from asymmetric warfare scenarios in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. "The problem," Rodriguez continued, his weathered face grim in the harsh fluorescent lighting, "is that our primary response team is currently engaged in operations overseas, and our secondary team is dealing with the aftermath of Hurricane Elena down south. That leaves us with a skeleton crew of experienced personnel and—" He paused, his eyes sweeping over the assembled recruits. "You." Maya watched as several of her fellow recruits straightened with excitement. finally seeing their chance to prove themselves in a real operational environment. Jackson cracked his knuckles with anticipation, while Williams was already calculating tactical approaches with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his own capabilities. But Maya felt something different. Not excitement, but a strange sense of recognition, as if pieces of a puzzle she had been unconsciously assembling were suddenly clicking into place. The briefing continued with tactical details that would have overwhelmed most civilian analysts, but Maya found herself automatically organizing the information into coherent patterns. The attackers had chosen their timing perfectly, during the storm, when visibility was limited and response times would be slower. They had selected multiple secondary targets to divide defensive resources, a classic misdirection strategy that she recognized from her studies of insurgent tactics. More troubling was what Rodriguez wasn't saying. Maya noticed the way he avoided certain details about the facility's defenses, the way he glanced repeatedly at his watch as if working against a deadline none of them had been told about. There were gaps in his intelligence briefing, inconsistencies. That suggested either incomplete information or deliberate omissions. Her analytical mind began filling in those gaps with possibilities that made her stomach clench with anxiety. Chen. Rodriguez's voice cut through her thoughts like a whip. Crack. You're assigned to communications support. Monitor radio traffic and maintain contact with command. It was exactly the kind of background assignment she had expected. Important enough to be necessary, insignificant enough to keep her away from any real action. Maya nodded silently, accepting her role as she always did, but part of her mind was already working on something else entirely. As the briefing broke up and recruits began preparing for deployment, Maya found herself moving, with unusual purpose. Instead of the self-doubt that typically paralyzed her during high-pressure situations, she felt a strange calm settling over her thoughts. For the first time since arriving at basic training, the chaos around her made sense in a way she could process and understand. While others focused on checking their weapons and equipment, Maya was drawn to the communications station, not just to fulfill her assigned role, but because she had realized something that made her blood run cold. The attack patterns Rodriguez had described were too sophisticated for a random terrorist cell. The timing was too perfect, the target selection too strategic. This wasn't just an attack, it was the opening move in something much larger and more dangerous. Maya began monitoring not just the official communications channel she had been assigned to watch, but also scanning through frequency ranges that most operators ignored. Her self-taught knowledge of signal intelligence, gained through countless hours of independent study, allowed her to recognize patterns in the electromagnetic spectrum that others might miss. What she discovered in those first few minutes of monitoring made her hands shake with a combination of fear and anticipation. There were multiple coordinated communications networks operating in the area, using encryption protocols that suggested military-grade training and equipment. More disturbing still, some of the radio traffic was occurring on frequencies that should have been impossible for civilian groups to access. Maya realized that whoever was behind this attack had insider knowledge of military communications infrastructure, possibly including real-time intelligence about response protocols and defensive capabilities. The weight of this discovery pressed down on her like a physical force. She knew she should report it immediately, but she also knew how it would be received. Another failure from the recruit who couldn't shoot straight or climb a rope without falling. Her track record of incompetence would overshadow any intelligence she might provide, and precious time would be lost while more qualified personnel verified what she had already confirmed. For the first time in months, Maya felt the familiar surge of confidence that had once driven her to excel academically, despite every obstacle. But now that confidence was tempered by the knowledge that lives might depend on what she did next. The storm outside seemed to intensify as she sat at her communications post, surrounded by equipment that suddenly felt like the most important tools in the world. Maya's fingers moved across the radio controls with growing certainty. Her mind, processing multiple streams of information simultaneously in a way that felt more natural than anything she had done since arriving at training. She was no longer the failing recruit who couldn't meet physical standards. She was an intelligence analyst who had just uncovered something that could change everything. But even as clarity filled her thoughts for the first time in months, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to face the most important test of her life, one that would either validate everything she believed about herself or confirm every harsh judgment that had been passed upon her. The rain continued to hammer against the windows, but now it sounded less like the drowning of dreams and more like the drumbeat of approaching destiny. What happened next would later be classified at levels so high that even Maya herself would never know the full scope of what she had uncovered. But in that moment, sitting in front of multiple communication arrays with rain streaking the windows behind her, Maya Chen made a decision that would ripple through the highest levels of government and forever change how the military viewed intelligence analysis. She began documenting everything, not just the obvious communications patterns, but the subtle inconsistencies that painted a picture so disturbing it made her hands tremble as she typed. The attackers weren't just using military-grade encryption, they were using current military encryption, codes that should have been known, only to active personnel with the highest security clearances. More chilling still, their operational timing coincided perfectly with the deployment schedules of legitimate response teams, suggesting they had real-time access to classified military logistics. Maya's academic background in computer science, which had seemed irrelevant to her drill instructors, suddenly became invaluable as she traced digital signatures through the communication networks. What she discovered made her stomach drop into free fall. The attack wasn't just coordinated with insider knowledge, it was being actively supported by someone within their own command structure. The evidence was subtle, almost invisible, unless you knew exactly what to look for, but Maya's obsessive attention to detail revealed the truth. Radio transmissions that should have been automatically logged were disappearing from official records within minutes of being sent. Response coordinates were being subtly altered as they passed through certain relay stations. Most damning of all, the attackers were receiving real-time updates about defensive positions that could only have come from someone monitoring their own communications networks. Maya sat frozen in her chair as the implications crashed over her like ocean waves. This wasn't just terrorism, this was treason at the highest levels, a coordinated effort that involved people trusted with the nation's most sensitive secrets. And somehow, the recruit everyone considered worthless had stumbled into the middle of it. Her first instinct was to run to Staff Sergeant Rodriguez immediately, but something stopped her. If there was a traitor in their command structure, how could she know who to trust? Rodriguez himself might be compromised, or anyone else she might approach. The weight of the discovery pressed down on her like a physical force, and for a moment the familiar panic of inadequacy began to creep back into her thoughts. But then Maya remembered something her grandmother had told her years ago, shortly before she died. Mei Lin, she had said, using Maya's Chinese name, "Sometimes the ancestors put us in places we don't expect because they know we see things others cannot. When that happens, we must trust ourselves even when no one else will." Maya took a deep breath and began to think like the analyst she had trained herself to become, rather than the failing recruit everyone saw her as. If she couldn't trust the normal chain of command, she needed to find another way to get this information to people who could act on it. But first, she needed more proof. Evidence so clear and comprehensive that it couldn't be dismissed or buried. Working. With desperate efficiency, Maya began creating a comprehensive intelligence package that documented not just what she had discovered, but how she had discovered it. She included technical analyses that demonstrated her methodology, cross-referenced timestamps that proved the coordinated nature of the information leaks, and created a digital trail that would be impossible to explain away or ignore. As she worked, Maya found herself drawing on knowledge she had accumulated over years of independent study, cybersecurity protocols she had learned from online courses, signal analysis techniques from academic papers, even psychological profiles of insider threats that she had read in her spare time. All of those hours spent reading when she should have been sleeping, all of that seemingly useless academic knowledge was suddenly coming together in a way that felt like destiny. But Maya also knew that having the intelligence was only half the battle. Getting it to the right people in a way that would be taken seriously was an entirely different challenge. She was still just a failing recruit, and the people who needed to see this information operated at levels she had never even imagined reaching. That's when Maya remembered something she had read about emergency protocols for intelligence personnel, who discovered existential threats to national security. There were procedures in place, dating back to the Cold War, that allowed any military personnel to bypass normal command structures in cases of suspected treason or imminent catastrophic attack. The procedures were rarely used and carried enormous personal risk for the person invoking them, but they existed. Maya's hands shook as she accessed the emergency communication protocols buried deep in the military's classified databases. Protocols she technically wasn't supposed to know about, but had discovered during her exhaustive study of military intelligence procedures. What she was about to do could end her military career before it had even begun, but it might also save countless lives. The emergency beacon she activated would send an encrypted signal directly to the highest levels of military intelligence, bypassing every intermediate command structure. It would flag her intelligence package as requiring immediate attention from personnel with the highest possible security clearances. More importantly, it would create an unalterable record of what she had discovered and when she had discovered it, making it impossible for the information to be buried or explained away. As Maya initiated the transmission sequence, she felt a strange sense of peace settle over her thoughts. For months, she had felt like she was failing at everything that mattered. But now, sitting alone in a communication station during a storm that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building, she realized that perhaps she had been preparing for this moment her entire life. The upload would take several minutes to complete, during which time Maya found herself thinking about all the people who had dismissed her, all the instructors who had written her off, all the fellow recruits who had treated her like she was invisible. They had all been right about one thing. She wasn't cut out to be a typical soldier. But what they had failed to recognize was that the military needed more than just typical soldiers. Maya watched the progress bar inch toward completion and wondered if anyone would ever know what she had done here tonight. The classification levels involved meant that her role in uncovering what appeared to be one of the most significant security breaches in modern military history would likely remain secret forever. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that the right people would now have the information they needed to act. The transmission completed with a soft chime that seemed impossibly quiet given the magnitude of what had just occurred. Maya sat back in her chair, suddenly exhausted, and wondered what would happen next. She didn't have to wait long to find out. The secure phone next to her communication station, a line she hadn't even known was active, began ringing with a tone unlike anything she had ever heard before. Maya stared at the phone for 3 rings, her mind racing through possibilities. Emergency protocols existed for situations like this, but she had never imagined she would be the one to activate them. The phone's red secure light pulsed with each ring, indicating a level of encryption she had only read about in theoretical documents. Her hand trembled as she reached for the receiver, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. "Recruit Chen," she answered, her voice steadier than she felt. "Hold for the President of the United States," came a crisp voice that brooked no argument. Maya's world stopped. The rain against the windows, the distant sounds of her fellow recruits preparing for deployment. Even her own breathing seemed to pause as those words sank in. She had activated emergency protocols expecting to reach military intelligence, perhaps a general or admiral. She had never imagined that her discovery would escalate to the commander-in-chief himself. "Recruit Chen?" The voice that came through. The secure line was unmistakably familiar, one she had heard countless times on television and radio but never speaking her name. "This is President Harrison. I understand you've uncovered something that requires immediate attention. Yes, sir, Mr. President, sir. Maya's military training kicked in automatically, even as her mind struggled to process the surreal nature of the conversation. I've identified what appears to be a coordinated attack with insider support at the highest levels. I know. I've been briefed on your intelligence package, and I need you to understand something very important. The president's voice carried a weight that made Maya sit straighter in her chair. What you've discovered isn't just an isolated incident. It's confirmation of something we've been investigating for months. A network of compromised personnel that reaches into every branch of our military and intelligence services. Maya felt the world shift around her as the full implications hit home. Sir, how extensive is the compromise? Extensive enough that I can't trust normal communication channels or command structures. Extensive enough that I'm talking directly to a recruit who everyone thinks is failing basic training. There was something almost weary in the president's voice, the exhaustion of someone carrying impossible burdens. Your discovery has provided the final pieces of a puzzle that threatens the very foundations of our national security. The president continued, and with each word, Maya realized how dramatically her life was about to change. What I'm about to tell you is classified at levels that don't officially exist. 3 months ago, our most sensitive intelligence operations began failing at an alarming rate. Assets were being compromised, operations were failing just as they approached success, and our enemies seemed to know our moves before we made them. Maya found herself automatically analyzing the information, her mind clicking through the implications with startling clarity. The network you've been investigating, they're not just stealing information, they're actively sabotaging operations. Exactly, and tonight's attack isn't really about the research facility. It's about drawing our remaining loyal personnel into a trap where they can be eliminated or compromised. The president's voice carried a grim satisfaction. But your discovery has given us something they don't expect, knowledge of their communication networks and operational patterns. What do you need from me, sir? Maya asked, and was surprised by the confidence in her own voice. I need you to understand that everything is about to change for you, Recruit Chen. In approximately 10 minutes, you're going to receive orders, transferring you to a classified installation where you'll work directly with our most sensitive intelligence operations. Your training scores, your apparent failures, all of that was carefully orchestrated to hide your real capabilities until we needed them. Maya felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath her. Sir, I don't understand. My failures were real. I couldn't meet the physical standards, couldn't what? Couldn't hit targets while we were secretly adjusting your weapons? Couldn't complete obstacle courses while we were adding hidden impediments to slow you down? The president's voice carried a note of what might have been amusement. Maya, you were never failing. You were being tested in ways you couldn't see, and you passed every test that mattered. The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. Months of self-doubt, months of believing she was worthless, months of watching her dreams crumble. All of it had been orchestrated. But why? Why put me through that? Because we needed to know if you could maintain your analytical capabilities under extreme psychological pressure. We needed to know if you could continue to see patterns and solve problems even when everything around you suggested you were failing. The president's voice softened slightly. Maya, your academic record, your self-taught expertise in military intelligence, your psychological profile, all of it suggested you might be exactly what we needed for the most sensitive operations. But we had to be sure. Maya's mind reeled as she processed this information. Every harsh word from her instructors, every failed test, every moment of crushing self-doubt, it had all been theater designed to test her in ways she never could have imagined. The other recruits, do they know? Some do, some don't. The ones who matter, know. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, for instance. He's been fighting the urge to break character and tell you the truth for weeks. Your performance tonight, discovering. And reporting a threat that our most experienced analysts missed, that's exactly why we put you through hell. The secure phone crackled with static for a moment before the president's voice returned, now carrying unmistakable urgency. Maya, I need you to listen very carefully. In approximately 3 minutes, Major Sarah Kim will enter your communications station. She'll be accompanied by 2 agents from a division you've never heard of, and they'll escort you to a facility that doesn't officially exist. What you do there over the next few hours will determine whether we can neutralize this threat, or watch our entire intelligence infrastructure collapse. Maya felt a strange calm settling over her thoughts, the same clarity she had experienced while analyzing the intercepted communications. For the first time in months, she felt like herself. Not the failing recruit everyone saw, but the analyst she had trained herself to become. What will I be doing, sir? You'll be using those pattern recognition skills to trace every connection in this network, identify every compromised asset, and help us coordinate a simultaneous neutralization operation across 17 countries. The president's voice carried absolute confidence in her abilities. Maya, what you discovered tonight was just the tip of the iceberg. We're looking at the most significant intelligence breach in our nation's history, and you're the person who found the key to unraveling it. As if summoned by the president's words, Maya heard footsteps approaching her station. She looked up to see a woman in an unmarked uniform striding toward her with purposeful efficiency, flanked by 2 individuals, whose bearing suggested capabilities far beyond typical military personnel. "Sir, they're here," Maya reported. "Good. Maya, I want you to know something before you go. Every person who called you worthless, every instructor who wrote you off, every moment you felt like giving up, all of that prepared you for this moment. Sometimes the most important service we can provide to our country comes not from being the best soldier, but from being the right person in the right place with the right skills." Maya stood as Major Kim approached, and for the first time in months, she stood with her shoulders back and her head high. "Mr. President, I won't let you down. You already haven't. The intelligence package you compiled tonight is going to save lives and protect national security in ways you may never fully know. But Maya?" The president's voice carried a note of something that might have been paternal pride. "I have a feeling this is just the beginning for you." As Maya prepared to hand the phone to Major Kim, she realized that everything in her life had been leading to this moment. The years of independent study, the months of apparent failure, the crushing self-doubt, and the desperate determination to prove herself, all of it had been preparation for a role she never could have imagined. The recruit they called worthless was about to help save her country. And somewhere in the back of her mind, Maya could almost hear her grandmother's voice. Sometimes the ancestors put us in places we don't expect because they know we see things others cannot. The storm outside was finally beginning to clear, and Maya Chen was no longer the person she had been when it began. She was something else entirely, something the world desperately needed, even if it had taken the President of the United States, calling her in the middle of training to recognize what she had always been capable of becoming.